Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a while, so I'm very thankful to have you on board today. Before we start the video, I just wanted to say that I saw your suggestions and I have some ideas of my own on complex approach guides coming in the future, things such as circle to land approaches, raw data approaches, RNP approaches, limitations, landing performance, and so on. I think, however, it is important before we practice any complex approaches that we learn how to get out of a bad approach. Because bad approaches, they happen every now and then to everyone. With that said, for today's subject we have go-arounds. Now if this is your first time here on the channel, welcome. I'm an Airbus A320 type-rated first officer, and my objective here on YouTube as well as on my Twitch is to break down what we do in real life to help you adapt it into your flight simulation experience and by extension make it more realistic and fun. Now for today's guide, I've split it into 3 parts. In part number 1, we're gonna have some examples of cases when go-around has to be flown in real life. That list is not exclusive, it's just the subjects I picked for today. We're gonna build upon that in the future. In part number 2, we'll discuss the go-around procedure itself in the Airbus A320 and also different types of go-arounds depending on the situation you're in. And finally, in part number 3, we'll have our standard threat and error management conversation, the most common errors, threats, how to mitigate them, and how to brief your go-around. Now, if you find this guide useful, I would highly appreciate if you left a comment, because those greatly help me grow the channel, and most importantly, they are useful pieces of feedback for the future guides, and that applies to good and bad comments. Alright guys, thank you very much in advance. Let's jump into the video. Enjoy. Okay guys, so the very first case of a mandatory go-around that we're going to discuss is an unstabilized approach. What you're going to see on the screen is 2 approaches, one on the left being fully stabilized and continued to land, and one on the right becoming unstabilized on numerous occasions, just so you have a nice picture between the 2. So, what is a stabilized approach? According to EASA's definition, and I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, stabilized approach is one which is controlled in its flight path, lateral and vertical flight path, configuration, and energy from a predetermined point on the approach, which I'm going to call gate, until 50 feet over threshold or flare, whichever comes sooner. EASA has also established a list of 6 criteria that you can evaluate approaches against to determine if they are stabilized or not. Now, my understanding of the system is that operators, airlines or other commercial operators then take these regulations and they come up with their own criteria and tolerances suitable to their operations. Now, I don't want to share any real-world operators' policies online, it's their business, so I had to come up with my own list of stabilized approach criteria, which will be displayed on the screen for you, so you can take a screenshot. Especially if you've never flown in accordance with this concept, and this is your first time hearing about it, if you take a screenshot, follow it every approach, you're gonna be sure to be stabilized. Now, let's discuss the gate. Originally, when this concept started by Flight Safety Foundation, the gates were 1000 feet in IMC, 500 in VMC above aerodrome elevation level. This has been adapted in many ways, it's not mandated by EASA how to adapt this, operators choose here, and what I've chosen for myself on the stream is gate of 1000 feet for every instrument approach, regardless if it's VMC or IMC outside. Basically, if we see or don't see things outside. Every instrument approach will always be, for me, on the stream, 1000 feet above aerodrome elevation level. For visual flying, on the other hand, like visual approaches, circle to land, or circling with prescribed tracks, I typically use 500 feet. And the way to establish your gate, you take the chart, you take a look at the airport elevation, and I personally round it up to the nearest 100, and then add 1000 feet. This is our gate. We have to be stabilized latest by this gate and maintain that stabilization throughout the approach. If we destabilize, we have to perform a go-around. Second case that I have for us is lack of visual references at minima or below. So here is the principle. Every instrument approach procedure comes with minima. It can be either decision altitude / height or minimum descent altitude / height, depending on the type of approach. We'll cover that later in another video, but that's the basic principle. As you're descending on the approach, latest by that minima, you have to have acquired the visual references that allow you to continue the landing visually. And you have to maintain them after the minima as well, so you cannot lose them or you'll have to perform a go-around. Same concept applies to circling approaches as well, because they have minimum descent altitude. If you have lost your contact with the runway at a single point, you have to perform the go-around. Now, I know that more advanced users might have expected a little bit more here, maybe the approach band concept. We'll cover these types of things in future videos because I'll have to make one about low visibility operations anyways. For this video, as it's focused primarily later on the go-around itself, I just wanted to bring a very fundamental principle here. Let's move on to the next cases. Okay, for these next 4 cases coming up, I don't have a specific clip. It's just a very questionable weather on the approach to Fiumicino. I was trying to catch predictive wind shear and unfortunately I failed, so this will have to do. The first one is related to, of the 4 cases coming up, related to landing clearance. Whenever you're landing at a controlled aerodrome, you need to have a landing clearance to land. If you don't have one, by extension, that means you have to perform a go-around. Now, what about the case where they instruct you to make a go-around? Generally, pretty obvious, you have to do it in normal operations, unless you're an emergency aircraft and performing that go-around would be unsafe. There are a couple of examples where that could be the case. Maybe you are completely out of fuel, or you have 2 engines on fire, or 2 engines stalling. You know, there's a couple of these abnormals here. But under normal operations, if you do not have landing clearance, if you're instructed to make a go-around, you have to do it. You have to go and come back with another attempt. Guys, case number 3, related to aircraft's performance, malfunctions, and limitations. Briefly, imagine this, you're flying into an airport that has a short runway, let's say 1,800 meters, and you've done your performance without any failures. You have, let's say, 100 meters of stop margin. Then, as you turn final, you realize the aircraft gives you an alert, an ECOM, for a malfunction that affects the stopping performance. It could be either brakes, spoilers, flaps, reversers, hydraulics. There's a couple of options here. From that point onward, you don't really know what is your stop margin anymore because you have that malfunction. So a safe course of action could be, and you should consider, performing a go-around, requesting a little bit of delay vectors, redoing your performance after you've handled the malfunction to make sure that you can actually land with this issue. In most cases, the answer will be yes if you use max manual braking, but as a pilot, you have to ensure that you do have that performance. Now for limitations, what I have for you is an example of tailwind limitation. A321 NEO is limited to 15 knots of tailwind for landing, and this limitation is based on the tower reported wind. If you're turning final and the ATC reports that now tailwind component is 17 knots, unfortunately you cannot land. You can request another wind check if you have time for it, but if the wind exceeds the limit, you're gonna have to make a go around and find another solution to this. The next case I have for you, I believe this is number 5, will be Airbus specific system related alerts. There's a couple of alerts that the aircraft can give you where you should be considering a go around. I don't want to go into details with this, as I will make separate video about each of these alerts, lengthy videos as well. But just to give you a brief description, you have certain TAFs alerts, TCAS, predictive wind shear, and roll ropes. What you can take from this video, basic approach, if the aircraft screams at you to make a go-around, you should be making a go-around. It's a pretty smart airplane, it generally knows what's best for it, so you can follow it and stand by for these future guides. Eventually, in the future, I'm gonna make them to clarify exactly under which cases a go-around should be performed. Okay, so for the final case in the video, I have something that I think is incredibly important and unfortunately overlooked a little bit in flight simulation. The 6th case of a mandatory go-around is whenever pilot thinks it's necessary, and it could be either one of the pilots. Let me give you some concrete examples so you can picture this a little bit better. Imagine yourself flying a long VATSIM event flight from Frankfurt to Canary Islands, and at Canary Islands weather is tough. It's gusty, windy, like it often is there in real life. You're doing your approach and it comes out a little bit high on speed. You're flying VPP plus 10, a little bit high rate, exactly 1000 feet per minute, and a little bit high on profile, but not, still within half scale deflection, and same with the localizer. Technically, this is a stable approach. It complies with all the criteria. But is it really? That's my question for you. If you have to fight it a lot to salvage it, and you have this feeling, maybe you don't, but I know I do, in conditions like this, that there is something off about this approach, I would also suggest making a go around here. I call this feeling getting behind the airplane and realizing it. In those moments, your situational awareness just narrows down because you're fighting to get the aircraft on the path and you start ignoring other important pieces of information. That's why we have pilot monitoring in real life, but you will not always have that privilege, which is why I suggest to you calling that go around on yourself. Come back with another approach, anticipate the weather, anticipate maybe the ATC giving you slightly too much of a speed, try to liaison with them, to allow yourself to fly slower, whatever you have to do. But if your situational awareness is degrading, you're getting behind the airplane, just make that go around, come back again, and make sure that it's rock solid. Now, if on the other hand you fly on shared cockpit, whenever somebody calls a go around in multi-crew environment, go around has to be flown. It's non-negotiable. If you're on short final and your friend calls a go around on you, don't fight him, because that's not the moment to do it. You do the go around, and then as you're being vectored in for the next approach, you can ask him, hey man, what happened? I thought we were stabilized. Why the go around call? And he will give you the explanation of what he saw. Now what he saw might be wrong or correct, it doesn't matter. You can discuss it, brief it for the next approach and try again. But when the call happens, you have to execute the go around. Okay guys, that's it. This is the 6 cases I prepared for this video. I acknowledge that I could speak a lot more about them. And there are other things here like low visibility procedures and go arounds related to that and so on. These videos will come separately because they are very lengthy subjects, and I would like to finally move on to how to actually fly the go around, because this is why we are here for. I still hope that at least for some people the 6 cases were somewhat new, somewhat useful, and you're gonna start applying them. But now we can continue to the main part of the video. Let's go. Okay guys, it's finally time to explain some go-rounds. Let's get into it. So just for reference, we are currently on the base leg for ILS approach runway 20 center in Singapore in Airbus A321 NEO. So how do we fly the go-around once it becomes obvious that we have to do it? There's a couple of steps to it. I'll walk you through them. I hope I will do a decent job. I'll explain it like there's 2 of us. Obviously, if you're solo, you'll just have to do all the items by yourself. You can imagine go-around flows kind of like a game of ping pong or tennis, whatever you prefer. It's basically pilot flying and pilot monitoring, you know, playing a ball between one another. And it's all initiated by pilot flying. Pilot flying, once go-around becomes mandatory, has to do 3 steps at the same time. First one is advancing the thrust levers to toga detent. Incredibly important because it will, first of all, give you thrust to actually climb out. Second, it's going to activate go-around phase of the FMGC, which is important because if you don't have it, the airplane will sequence the destination, which means after go-around you're not going to have a flight plan anymore. And also this activates applicable modes of the automation, you know, Mentoga, SRS, go-around track or nav, depending on the aircraft type you're flying. Second action you have to do, if you're flying by hand, you have to pitch the aircraft up to 15 degrees. Nose up, that is, of course. Or, in case of a single engine go-around, 12.5 degrees. If you're flying with autopilot, autopilot will handle that. And once you reach the 15 degrees, you just follow the SRS commands. So SRS vertical flight director. Third action is you have to announce the go-around to pilot monitoring. And you do so by calling out go-around flaps. Now, moving to PM, we shift the ball to the other side. Pilot monitoring, what does he do? He retracts 1 notch of flaps in accordance to call go-around flaps. So if you're doing an approach with flaps full, you go to flaps 3, or like in our case, we have landing flap 3, so we go to flaps 2. Once we're fully configured, that is. Then you announce this, so for example, flaps 2. Ball moving again to pilot flying. He reads out the FMA, so Mentoga, SRS, go-around track, or nav. Pilot monitoring checks that, and then announces positive climb. Back to pilot flying, he will now order gear up, which pilot monitoring does. And last item, what I like to do is I like to say my go-around altitude blue, because this is last chance for me to confirm that go-around altitude. So in our case, it would be 4,000 feet blue. And that completes the flow. It's now finished. The aircraft is climbing out in SRS, and you have a little bit of time to now communicate the go-around to ATC as well. Eventually, the aircraft will cross the thrust reduction and acceleration altitude, which you can set or leave as default in the performance page of your FMS on the go around performance page. Once that happens, lever climb starts to flash just like on any takeoff. You set thrust climb and FMA will read thrust climb, auto thrust. And as the aircraft is gently accelerating and climbing, you clean up the flaps and eventually perform the same flow as you do on takeoff. That's pretty much it. In the meantime, pilot monitoring, of course, is communicating with ATC. Depending on what ATC tells you, you either let the airplane fly the published misapproach procedure or go on heading and so on and so forth. This is pretty much it. Now, once you eventually reach your go-around altitude, what I would also like to highlight for you is to always check how much fuel you have left. This is very useful, and I love to do it as soon as my workload allows it, because I want to see how much extra fuel I have to maybe try another approach at my destination and decide if I can do that, or if I have to commit to land, or if I have to divert. So yeah, that's basically it. And also, since go-around phase of the FMGC is activated, I also suggest you activate the approach phase, because in go-around phase, the target speed is green dot always. With the magenta triangle, you will see that later. By the way, 1000 stabilized. Let's go to this approach, because I wanted to demonstrate the go-around for you. So now let's pretend we're crew of this aircraft. This is a voiceover over the clip, but I will try to match it. So autopilot off, cut 1. As you can see, the approach is fully stabilized. We've had our configuration, final configuration done. Landing checklist was completed. Our approach is where it should be. We are maintaining glide path and localized. The rate of descent is also stabilized. We are not touching FMS, so we can absolutely continue the approach. And we already have the visual references. We're gonna make a go around anyways. We're gonna do it from minima, just for training purposes, and so I can demonstrate to you this go around ping pong in a second. Checked. Land.
300 minimum.
Go around flaps. Flaps 2, Mentoga, SRS, nav, climb blue, autothrust blue. Checked, positive climb. Gear up, gear up. 4000 feet blue, autopilot 1. There it is, now we can communicate. Whatever our call sign is, Airbus 1 going around, climbing 4000. Thrust climb, open climb, alt blue, autothrust. Checked. Now we just wait for the speed to settle a little bit, because thrust was reduced, so the speed dropped back a couple of knots. But once we see it go above F speed with a little bit more positive trend, this is where we go to flaps 1. There we have it, flaps 1, speed checked, flaps 1. And we just continue acceleration like you would after every departure from this point onwards. Speed, vertical speed, plus 1500. I do this to reduce my climb rate a little bit, just in case there was an aircraft, at 5000 feet, for example, not to climb too quickly. Because we are pretty sure that we've complied with the go-around climb gradient, we have terrain separation, there is no drama there, so you can reduce the climb rate, and this will help acceleration as well. Here comes the S-speed, and just like on takeoff, flap 0, speed checked, flap 0. And as you can see, go-around phase is active in the FMS, so the aircraft maintains green dot with that magenta triangle. Since we configured, we now also disarm the spoilers, and turn off the lights, other than landing lights, that is. Alright, perfect. That was pretty nicely flown go-around. Everything pretty smooth. I hope you saw this ping pong. It's a little bit easier if there were 2 people here, but since you will be flying your go-around solo, I think it might be helpful as well. Now, since this go-around is finished and our workload is slow, everything is nicely done, we now have time to start thinking on what to do next. Of course, we're coordinating that with ATC as well at this stage, but also we have time to go to the FMS, check our fuel, and activate the approach phase, what I've told you before. That completely finishes the sequence, and yeah, whatever happens now, let's say we have enough fuel, we can just ask for radar vectors for the next approach. And as you can see, since the go-around phase was active, the aircraft retained its flight plan and the last flown approach together with performance. So this is the advantage of using those thrust levers in TOGA. Okay guys, so for the next go-around practice, we are in FS Labs A321 NEO, and that's Microsoft Flight Simulator 24. We'll be making an ILS approach for runway 31 left at Abu Dhabi Airport. And on this go-around, we're gonna play the same ping pong, but we will be adding go-around soft to the equation. I believe go-around soft came to A320 family. It's available on the NEOs from A350 and A380. And what go-around soft allows you to do is basically reduce the amount of energy during the go-around. Let me put it this way. Jet engines of these airplanes are powerful enough to easily and safely climb out on takeoff in case one of the engine fails. You can climb out on one engine and not even using TOGA power. You can do it with flex as well. So as you can imagine, during go-around, especially with a light airplane, you have quite a lot of energy and things happen very, very quickly. Especially if you have low go-around altitude, like 2000 or 2500 feet. In some cases it can be lower, like Stockholm, which we're gonna go to later, with 1500 feet. So reducing the amount of energy might actually be a good idea. Now, how do you use go-around soft and what does it do? Basically, you do the same thing as with normal go-rounds, so you announce go-round flaps, you set thrust levers to TOGA detent, but then immediately you move one detent backwards to flex MCT, and that's going to activate man go-around soft on your FMA. You're gonna see me struggle with this a little bit later in this clip, but that's how you do it. Now, what does go-around soft do? It will target, depending on the aircraft, either 2000 or 2300 feet per minute of climb rate, giving you this nice gentle go-around behavior and time to respond, just generally reduce the amount of energy. Now, if at any point during the go-around you realize, you know what, this was not a good idea, TOGA is still available, so you can still go back to TOGA if needed, but now on the NEO you have this nice option. I would like to highlight here, there is a limitation with go-around soft, and it applies to single engine. If you are doing a single engine go-around soft is not available, you'll have to use TOGA. Now, the reason why we are doing this in FS Labs is because unfortunately at the moment of recording this video, go-around soft is bugged on ToLiss airplanes, and it does not give you the correct climb rate, and if you fly ToLiss, please avoid doing go-around soft. You can experiment with it, but it can really hurt you, because from my testing it always targets around 500 feet per minute of climb, which is way too low for a go-around. So I suggest you don't do it, but if you want to experiment yourself, please feel free. Alright, let's jump to the go-around and play our ping pong. Go-around flaps. Flaps 3. Men go-around soft SRS nav AP1 climb blue autothrust blue. Checked. Positive climb. Gear up, gear up. And 4000 feet blue. So this is, as you can see, very similar thing. It wasn't very nicely done because of FS Labs thrust detents. I mean, I couldn't get my calibration right, so it took me a minute. But if your detents are calibrated nicely, then it shouldn't be a problem for you. And as you can see, other than go around soft, it's practically the same thing. Now I'm struggling to set the thrust climb. There it is, thrust climb, open climb, alt blue, auto thrust. And again, same sequence of events as after departure. We are slowly accelerating plus F speed. Trend is positive. We can go for flaps 1, speed checked, flaps 1, and then it's S speed. I'm gonna cut it here. I think you get the point here. In the meantime, we're communicating with ATC, and later on we can go into vertical speed, clean up the aircraft, do the flow with spoilers, lights, activate approach phase eventually, and also verify how much extra fuel we have and what options do we have for the next approaches. Okay, so now we are in Arlanda. We are flying an ILS approach for runway 01 right in Fenix A320 CEO. As we've established in the last clip, CEOs do not come with go-around soft, but as you can see on my FMA, missed approach altitude for this approach is only 1,500 feet. So now imagine, you have to do a go-around at 1,000 feet, either because ATC tells you or you are just unstabilized. In our case, we'll be stabilized, but we'll still do it. What can we do? Because if you use TOGA, especially in a light airplane, this 500 feet, it will go in a blink of an eye. The airplane will capture the altitude and will just accelerate very quickly with TOGA thrust. It might result, for example, in overspeed, and workload is enormous. Well, we cannot use go-around soft. However, we can perform something occasionally referred to as high-energy go-around. The way it goes is very similar to go-around soft, but instead of moving thrust levers to TOGA and then flex, we move them to TOGA and then 2 clicks backwards to climb. The airplane will then engage with thrust climb. In case of Phoenix, it's going to be momentarily SRS, but then it's going to be climb, which gives you lower rate and lower thrust. And even with all of this, once I do the go around, you'll see how dynamic this maneuver is. Now, I would like to highlight that you're only supposed to do this climb go around when it's really needed. So I suggest you do it in case where you do go around very early and you're very close to your go around altitude, or B, when the go around altitude is very, very low, like in this case. Okay, so let's see how to fly this high energy go around with thrust climb instead of TOGA. Go around flaps, flaps 2, thrust climb, SRS, go around track, autopilot 1, alt blue auto thrust, checked, positive climb, gear up, 1500 feet blue, checked thrust climb, open climb, alt blue, checked, and flaps 1, speed checked, flaps 1. Flaps 0, speed checked, flaps 0, speed alt star. Damn it, man. This go around, as you can see, it's so packed, so much stuff happening. That's why this ping pong is so useful. You always know what to do. We reached our go around altitude so quickly, we can fully clean up now, perform the flow. So as you can see, it's useful to have this, because imagine doing all of this with TOGA, how quickly the airplane would have reached 1500 feet, and how quickly it would start accelerating an alt start towards, VFE, so limiting speed for the flap. There is a real risk here of overspeeding the flaps, for example, and this is why Airbus came up with this procedure that flight crew, when required, can opt to use TOGA and thrust climb. But first, again, I want to emphasize this: make sure to set TOGA. This is what activates the go-around phase of FMGC as we established at the beginning. And thanks to that, the airplane has something to follow now. It retained the flight plan and it didn't sequence the destination. So once we aren't enough, it can just follow the go-around enough. In Orlando, go-around just happens to be this manual segment, but at least, as you can see in the FMGC, everything is retained, including our last flown approach. So at any point, we are ready to go with vectors for the next ILS, basically. That was high energy go-around without go-around soft. So we are still in Stockholm Arlanda and still flying the A320 CEO from Phoenix. This time, however, we will be checking out discontinued approach. Basically, whenever the aircraft is at or above FCU altitude, pilots have a choice between doing go-around procedure or discontinued approach. If you're below FCU selected altitude, you always perform the go-around procedure. But here in Arlanda, missed approach altitude is very low, which means if we find out we have to go around until that point, this is the procedure that I would personally apply. It's very useful for these airports where go-around altitude is very low, like Arlanda or like Tallinn. Let's take a look on how to do it. Okay, so how do we perform a discontinued approach? The first thing is pilot flying has a callout. It's cancel approach in this case, so this is what we're going to say. Imagine now ATC tells us to do a go-around and follow published missed approach. So we push on the approach push button on the FCU there. This disengages the approach modes. FMA reverts to vertical speed minus 700, alt blue heading and autopilot 1, and that's absolutely fine. Happy days. We'll accelerate a little bit and also start cleaning up gently. We go into flaps 3 as the aircraft is descending to that missed approach altitude. We'll also clean up, we'll go gear up because we are wasting a lot of fuel with this high thrust setting. And we have alt star, and let's say ATC shortly will give us something. They will usually tell us what to do. In the meantime, we just arm nav, so the aircraft will proceed basically on the path of primary flight plan. And ATC now tells us climb 4,000 feet, so we go thrust climb, open climb, alt blue, 4,000 feet blue, and we clean the flaps. Flaps 1, speed check flaps 1, and speed selected 201 knots. We're doing that to completely clean the wing of the flaps, reduce our drag. Now, something very important, because I think this stage you guys already mastered, is what happens with your flight plan. What's the difference between cancelled approach or discontinued approach and a go around? What will happen once we overfly the destination, In primary flight plan, we are going to lose it. Basically, it will sequence the destination. So what you will have to do, when time allows it, you will have to go into the FMGC and perform lateral revision and insert Stockholm again as new destination and program the new approach in. This is the difference. You're going to have to do that at some point when time allows it. And that's discontinued approach for you. Quite useful procedure in cases where you know this is not going to work out quite early, or ATC tells you quite early, and at the same time missed approach altitude is low, like for example Stockholm. And another one that I can tell you from memory would be Tallinn, where it's 2,200 feet. Alright guys, let's move on to the next one. For the final go-around type in this video, I want to discuss rejected landing with you, or as some people refer to it, aborted landing. What it essentially is, it's a go-around near the ground, and that ground proximity comes with a couple of challenges that we have to consider, and it affects how we fly this maneuver. The very first threat that you should think about is tail strike awareness. It's especially relevant for A321 variants, but not only. Basically, every airplane has certain pitch limit after which you're going to make a contact with the runway with your tail. So that's a tail strike. And with A321, because of their length, that pitch is the smallest. With thrust compressed, it's 9.7 degrees. Now, Airbus systems also come into equation here, because essentially at some point of the approach, that can be either 50 or 100 feet, depending exactly on the aircraft variant, the fly-by-wire system will stop compensating for pitch moment changes resulting from adding or decreasing power. What does it mean? It means that when you perform rejected landing, you add toga, the aircraft might have a bit of a pitch up moment. And we have to control the rate of change in pitch to avoid that tail strike. Also, we do not retract the flaps or gear until the go-around is secured. That's why the call-out for this is a little bit different. What I suggest you use is you just say go-around, set thrust levers to toga, control the rate of change in pitch, monitor your pitch, and once you secure a climb out, you can then call go-around flaps, which is going to start the normal go-around ping pong that we have discussed before. Let's take a look at the live example I've prepared for you here. Okay, so we are on short final. It's an ILS approach runway 25 center in Hong Kong, and we'll purposely perform a questionable landing with early and gentle flare, and we'll also keep the thrust and climb detent, essentially allowing the aircraft to maintain speed and float down the runway. This might lead to a touchdown zone excursion, which is something we cannot accept in real life. Let's see how it plays out. We're crossing 50 feet, already gently flaring, keeping the thrust in, and essentially the aircraft is just floating at 10 feet. Here comes power idle. It looks very bad. Okay, go around. Here comes the light bounce, but it's okay, we accept it, and we control the rate of change in pitch. We secure this gentle climb out, and now go around, flaps. Flaps 3, Mentoga, SRS nav, out of thrust blue, checked, positive climb, gear up, 4,000 feet, blue. That's it. It followed pretty quickly. Sorry, my actions in the simulator were a little bit quicker. I couldn't keep up with myself in the voiceover, but I think you get the picture. What I would like you to take away from this is that whenever you have to reject the landing from such low heights, you set thrust levers to toga, you call go around, just go around, and then you you control the rate of change in pitch. Be mindful of this tail strike awareness, especially if it's an Airbus A321 variant, so A321 NEO CEO and so on. Because with these airplanes and their pitch limitation, if you get quite a bad rejected landing, like bounce with low speed, high pitch, you really might tail strike the aircraft. So control that pitch and rate of change in pitch. And only after you secured yourself this nice climb out, you're properly set and go around, you call go around flaps, and we can retract flaps 1 notch, do the gear up, and all of the other things that we've displayed in the previous examples. That's it, guys. This is the rejected landing. We're going to also watch a clip from the outside just to emphasize how little tail clearance A321 variants actually have. And really, keep this in mind. We actually just had a tail strike during go around in real life on a 777 a couple of days ago. Maybe I'll link the video to that in the description. This is why I'm emphasizing this tail strike awareness here so much. I would also like to remind you, if a light bounce happens on touchdown, That's absolutely okay. Accept it. Especially if it's kind of a low energy situation, maybe where you cut the power way too soon, you don't have the speed. You have to let the aircraft touch down, because if you're trying to flare it out too much, you might go to a very high rate of change in pitch, and that might result in the tail strike. I think this is most cases in real life of tail strike during rejected landings. They happen more or less like this. So absolutely, just accept the contact with the runway. It is absolutely okay. Even in this clip we had one. That's not an issue. Bigger picture is we have to make a go around, and we want to avoid striking the tail of the airplane. Alright, let's go to the outside view. Okay, so let's see the same approach, same rejected landing. It's a replay from the outside view, just to give you a perspective of how much tail clearance you actually have during these maneuvers. Here comes our float over the runway. We're going to cut power shortly and then initiate our go around. There it is. Focus on the tail. Here comes the bounce. We set toga. We control the rate of rotation. Climbing out, go around secured. We call go around flaps. This is how it went. And you see exactly how little distance you have between the tail and the surface. So if you pull a lot, or if you come in with high pitch to begin with and you pull a lot, you might really have a tail strike. Alright guys, that was the final example of go around in our video. We are moving on to the final part, threat and error management. Alright, so the final part of the video, threat and error management. We're flying an A319 by Fenix in Microsoft Flight Simulator 24, and this will be an eyeless whiskey approach for runway 16 left. It's not really that relevant, it's mostly there just to have a clip in the background. I will simply walk you through the list of things that I would consider as possible threats, errors, and how you can mitigate them, brief for them, practice, and generally just avoid getting yourself into a situation that might turn out to be very difficult to manage, especially for single pilot operations that we are doing so often in flight simulation. The first threat that I have for you, and it's a little bit of an error on pilots' end, is not studying the missed approach procedures. You see, some airports have very simple go-arounds. It's essentially straight ahead, climb 5, 6, 4, 3,000 feet, and that's it. However, that is not always the case, and even here on this approach you can see that we have some speed limitations in the turn, 200 knots, then we have specific altitude limitation, 2,000 feet exactly, then we have between 3,000 and 4,000 feet, and eventually 4,000 feet exactly. You have to brief these kinds of things, because you might in high workload situation just set 4,000 feet and forget it, send it, and you're gonna find yourself doing an altitude bust, which is something we would prefer to avoid. And things like this unfortunately happen. There were cases, for instance, in Zurich, which is another airport where approaches can have these missed approach altitudes in steps, but the crew simply did not notice this. They set the final missed approach altitude, and that resulted in an altitude bust, and that can cause, for instance, interference with other traffic on arrival. That's just one example I can give you. Speed, on the other hand, can be an issue, because in A319, that is as light as the one I'm flying in this video, it's generally fine. But in A321 or A320, you will do your ping pong, you will go for flap 0, and then you have to fly green dot, but green dot usually will be much higher than 200 knots, and sometimes it can be 185, the speed limitation. So what you have to do in such cases is stay configured with flaps 1, but that has to be briefed, because if you do not brief it, again, in high workload situation, it's likely you're just going to act automatically, finish the go-around ping pong, and you'll find yourself in a configuration that is not applicable to the procedure, where you basically cannot follow it anymore. So always brief the missed approach procedure thoroughly. Discuss the missed approach altitudes and speeds. Do not make a briefing where you state the obvious, like super easy things, but I would say speeds, different altitudes, or maybe it has a complex routing, are something that is absolutely worth the time to brief, just so it doesn't startle you and catch you off guard. For the second threat, I have low weight combined with low missed approach altitude. Something we've already seen in Arlanda, and something you might see during this go around that's going to happen around 1,000 feet here as well. Why is it a threat? Well, in Atlanta you already saw it. The aircraft is just accelerating very quickly towards the VFX because it's reaching the go around altitude very, very quickly. And this is amplified for light airplanes. So always consider this and brief it. And what can you brief? You can, for example, brief that you will be using go around soft if it's available on the aircraft you're flying, or a high energy go around if you're above acceleration thrust reduction altitude, which you can set also on performance page to be slightly lower for these cases. That's also an option. Those are your mitigations here. What else? I would say that's it really. So always brief how you can mitigate the chances of altitude bust and busting the flap speed or gear speed even if you forget to retract the gear. And those are the options I see as relevant here. Let's move on to the third case. The third subject on our threat and error management list will be workload management. I'm talking about it because everyone knows we are trained to be go-around minded, and I think nobody can argue that go-around is a safety-driven maneuver/procedure. However, those things don't mean it's risk-free. Go-around is highly dynamic, lots of energy situation that requires sound workload management. If you do not have that workload management, you're gonna fall behind the airplane, and that might reduce safety margins. So now question is, how do we set ourselves up to successfully manage that workload? The first step is practice. I encourage you to use this video to practice a couple of go-rounds in a couple of different scenarios, maybe at airports you most frequently fly to feel very confident with that procedure. The second step is correct briefings. Discuss with yourself, or if you fly with somebody else, what is actually important for your go-around. What are the limiting speeds, climb gradient. Actually, you cannot really use that in sim yet, maybe in the future. But altitude constraints, maybe complex routing, etc. That sets you up ahead of the airplane, because you know exactly how you'll fly it, what are the limitations on it, and so on. And third is prioritize and execute your actions. The most important part is correctly flying the maneuver. Make the correct callout. Make the correct response to that callout with flaps. Read the FMA. Clean up the gear. For instance, what I like to do when I fly on VATSIM is when I do a go-around, I do go-around flaps, I retract the flaps, I read the FMA, positive climb, gear up, I confirm my missed approach altitude, and then I talk to ATC. I don't talk to them as I do it, because I know they will respond something. Maybe they will, give me a different clearance. Maybe they will tell, continue present heading, or climb runway heading, whatever it is. It's gonna add to my workload management. First, I want to fly the airplane and navigate it, only then I want to communicate. Now, by all means, I'm not saying, ignore ATC until you reach your missed approach altitude. That's not what you should be doing. You have to tell them you're going around. But just because you have to tell them, it doesn't mean you have to do it immediately. Give yourself a couple of seconds just to manage the most important part of the situation, which is aircraft flight path management. That covers the third threat. Next concept on our list is something that is more about your mentality when flying than singular threat or error to manage. And it's mentality of staying ahead of the situation, not just the airplane, but the situation as a whole. So what I like to do, whenever I have a go-around, as soon as I complete my fly, navigate, communicate task, and let's say I'm being vectored, or as you see here, I'm on long miss approach, I like to take a quick look back on what happened, and also what are my options from now on, especially regarding the fuel. Fuel is incredibly important in these situations. I'll give you an example from a stream we had long time ago. We were flying into Zurich, it was a big VATSIM event, and turning final for my approach, I received a predictive wind shear alert from the airplane instructing a go-around, which we ended up doing. And to stay ahead of the situation, we asked the controller if it's a possibility to perform approach for another runway because we still have fuel before we have to divert. Sadly, he refused that and he offered another approach for the same runway, suggesting that nobody else had any wind shear issues. So we decided to give it a try. At that point, we started receiving a little bit of delay vectors because it was a big event, and it was obvious that if we go around again, we have to divert somewhere. So we started collecting weather from Geneva and some other airports that I cannot remember now to determine where to go. We even prepared the diversion routing in the FMS. Now what ended up happening is we got wind shear again, this time reactive. We had to perform the escape maneuver and then follow that by a go around. And we had to activate our contingency plan, which was basically to divert to Geneva. And that's exactly what happened. And this is what I mean by staying ahead of the situation. Don't just go for the next approach hoping that the weather has improved. Think about what went wrong. If it wasn't weather, if it was something simple like you not flying a stable approach, that's easy to correct. But always stay ahead of this situation instead of being hopeful and just reactive. Sometimes you have to be reactive, but if you can afford it and there is room for it, being proactive is very healthy, because then you just have items to execute rather than come up with a new plan as you're burning out your extra fuel. So this is point number 4, stay ahead of the situation. The last threat we have in the video is something incredibly specific, and honestly it doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen, and I'm very passionate about this particular threat. It practically dictates my habits since I've started flying the Airbus. And the threat is intercepting the glide path in clean wing. And here is why it's a threat related to go-rounds. First of all, the airplane generally will not have the ability to maintain its speed once it intercepts the glide path, because it just doesn't have enough drag to do so, and the speed is already quite high. And you know, these wings, they make an excellent glider, so good luck decelerating. But then, even bigger threat is if your missed approach altitude is quite high, because as soon as you intercept the glide path, you set the missed approach altitude. Then if you have to make a go-around, you have to apply the go-around procedure. But once you set thrust levers to toga with clean wing, the aircraft is not going to engage the FMGC go-around phase or the autopilot modes related to go-around. It will basically just add power while following the approach. I have a live example for you, so just take a look how quickly this can deteriorate and create challenges for you. So let's all, for the end, last thing in the video, check out how does this error of intercepting the approach in clean configuration escalate once we set thrust levers to toga. So we have main toga on the FMA, but glide slope and localizer remain engaged together with autopilot. Look what's happening, the aircraft is pulling up the engines and we're just accelerating like a fighter jet following the approach. This can escalate very quickly and you have to immediately correct for it. The way to do it is you disconnect the autopilot and fly directors, and you have to fly initially by hand. What you will see me do here is I will try to get some automatics back as quickly as possible just to ease my workload, so I'm getting autothrust back in speed mode, and later I'll follow with fly directors just to, you know, take it off my hands. As you can see, this can become really dangerous and fast, because the airplane will accelerate momentarily since it's descending. On top of that, you had to hand fly your missed approach, so if it's a complex procedure, that's gonna be difficult. So you have to stay on top of this, and ideally don't intercept your approaches with clean wing. That's where I took my habit from in real life. I know it's incredibly rare and specific case, but it happens to simmers, and I've heard stories of this happening in real life too. Alright guys, with this we can finally close the video. It's been some 50 minutes long. I know it's a lot of time, but I wanted to make this guide quite in depth so it gives us a solid foundation for all the advanced flying I want to demonstrate on YouTube later. Now, as I've said in the beginning, if you found it useful, and I hope you did, I would appreciate feedback, and I also invite you to join our Discord server as well as Twitch channel. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've managed to reach the end. I highly appreciate it, and I wish you only safe flights in the simulator. Also practice some go-rounds, it's good for you. Alright guys, thank you so much again, see you around.